Hello, fellow industry explorers. Welcome to another episode of our Start Your Career series. I've got Brent Armstrong of Alpine Rigging with me. Brent likes to take complex problems and make simple solutions for them. And we're going to talk all about entertainment rigging. So without further ado, Brent, how are you doing today?
Hey, Siobhan, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Brent and I go back a little bit in my career. We've worked together on some installs, which is always really nice. And thank you so much for doing this with me. I see we've got a lot of people tuning in and watching. Hello, guys. Please comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know. It's always fun to know if you guys are all over the country or all over the world. But I would love to just start from a wide angle and then zoom into where you're at. So let's start with, what is rigging? Super broad, super general. What is rigging?
Wow, that is pretty broad. That's a tricky one. It's probably the suspension and carrying of payload, right? You could rig. That's tricky, right? You could. What is it? I'm going to get my second certification jammed up. The NCCCP. Right? Isn't that a rigging thing? That's for like tow truck drivers and industrial riggers. Rigging is pretty wide and varied. I think it's using slings and lifting material to put an object in suspension.
I totally agree, yeah.
Or, hacking into voting machines and changing the outcome of an election would be rigging.
Different kind of rigging.
No. You threw it out.
But let's zoom in a little bit. Now, specifically, what's entertainment rigging? Now, I like that you mentioned industrial rigging, right? But how is it different when we're specifically talking about the entertainment sector?
Sure. So now we've disregarded the lifting industry, which is a mistake I think a lot of beginning riggers do, because it's so contextual. I'll answer about entertainment rigging, but if you look at the lifting industry outside of entertainment, there's a lot of lessons and takeaways, best practices, documentation that are good to bring in here. It's kind of a zoom in, zoom out thing, but that's not the question at hand. Entertainment rigging's rigging services and supporting of an entertainment event, right? Started out with rock and roll concerts. Then when we move into rock and roll festivals, outdoor events, I believe in the mid-'80s, we got the corporate industrial sector. That's your average corporate conference, Intel, Idaho Potatoes, something like that. Live events, boxing, the ice capades, way back. My understanding is Disney on Ice was the OG, let's fly the audio stacks, not ground stack them. Like that might have been the inception with Roy, and kind of there's like an orbit of G1 dudes, right? Don't put me on the spot and ask me to name all the Generation 1 guys. But there were like 5 of them, right, that just started figuring stuff out. I mean, It's crazy to think, Siobhan, because you and I know red steel, white steel, 3/8 half inch, use this. Imagine figuring that out on the fly for the ice capades day to day. Right? I've heard just some stories that warp me out. So that's rigging services, lifting stuff. In support of any sort of entertainment event. Most commonly, we're now talking about chain hoists, aluminum box truss, and round slings, right? That would be the meat and potatoes of entertainment rigging, and then a workflow to support the install and dismantle of that stuff. And we've ducked into the regulatory shadows.
Let's zoom in even more.
Too, once you go to entertainment rigging.
Let's zoom in a little bit more, because there are different kinds of riggers, as I understand it. There's like ground riggers, upper high riggers, production riggers. Can you talk a little bit more about what specifically is production rigging?
Sure. Those are tough terms because that's kind of regional, right? I meet tons of like folks that are still 6 deep in the car to rally to an event that will say they're production rigging, and what those cats usually mean is the ground support or the base structure, steel structure's been installed, raised to trim, dogged off, and then like the band comes in under it. The production, they'll use the term production rigging for that. That's not what I do. I'd be glad to, if I had some time. To me, production rigging is when you start to work directly with the end user or the client to kind of support the rigging install through their lens. That can be working, I do some big gigs that'll have 4 different rigging vendors on them, and somebody needs to be the clearinghouse of all that information And then as you come up in the game, there's just a slightly different approach, vocabulary, speech pattern, behavior when talking to the people with the money. Different than, the skills you're working on when you're a ground rigger and stuff. So you're just kind of the intermediary between the end user, the client, and kind of the physical install of the project, right? Day to day, I'm managing the entire rigging department for a show. We digitally manage the drawing, either participate with a master draftsman or just own it outright and control that, so everything's dimensionally accurate. Things can't change. Load calculations, not something you're into at the ground rigging level. Mostly you don't see this when you're starting, because as a ground rigger, an up rigger, a lead rigger, you're still mostly on a construction project. Right? By the time it becomes a show, you're gone. You're coming back in 8 hours for the out or something like that. So you never get to see like the artistry of it. You never get to work with the shumways, right? When the gags come in and stuff like that, there's a different way to relate. I think of it as a different kung fu. There's just like a different kung fu style to relate to all these different people. And you just start stacking them up so you have better value to the production and your client, right? I'm really lucky in my path. I come from working in the steels and knowing how heavy a 2-ton in that. And that I try to use that to have a broad range of operational competency, right? I know the bullets. I can play the rope tying games. I got the shackle and the pin tricks, all that's all the way up to, executive producer and beyond, where you can talk to them in broad terms. When this is a reality of my world, we want to go to China and fly a championship trophy 170 feet up. We'd be talking in meters if we were internationally, and for a 3D magic carpet ride. And you need to explain to them in context what that involves: timelines, cost, regulatory oversight, safety, exposure, stuff like that.
So where do you get training for all of this?
You pay attention every day.
Pay attention every day. Solid. That's solid advice.
That's my trick, honestly. I mean, you have to be a learner, apply critical thought. You can't just where did we learn? I kind of had my hand up. I want to learn the whole time. And when I was at the local rigger level, being the ground rigger, you got to get out of the steel if you want to learn. I always said the fast money's up high and the long money's on the ground, right? You can show up 4 hours, make the 250, come back. Right? That's a great way to live. It's a great job. A lot of people do that. If you want to progress in the rigging game, you need to be on the ground talking to people. Once you become the ground rigger level, then you're gonna. Now, I guess we're just talking. Let's focus on arenas and being a ground rigger in an arena kind of thing. You're most likely going to see a different rock and roll band 2-3 times a week. That's exposure to 3 different methodologies, attitudes, personalities, just overall approaches. In each one of them, if you're a learner, you should be seeing, what does that guy do well? The motor box opened up today, and there's a map of how I build the bridle, right? Mm-hmm. The last 6 guys didn't do anything about that. They just yelled at me when I used a 3/4 shackle on the rock and roll, right? So every day you're going to see the strengths and weaknesses of what is ultimately leadership, right? You're going to get to a point and you're going to start investing in your leadership methodology, because you're leading the workforce and you are a leader. Even lower on the food chain as a rigger, you are a leader. Think about all the people that come to you and ask, is this right? Is this wrapped right? Is this supposed to be like this? It can be your first day as a ground rigger, and a stranger you've never known is coming up to you. That involves leadership to manage those situations. You might not be thinking about that when you're trying to make sure you wrap to the outside, not to the inside or something. Yeah. But in the end, it'll paid attention all the time, showed up on time, always had my hand up to stay late, to work more, to do more, to see more. That added, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I really appreciate your holistic approach to rigging training, because you're talking about leadership and communication and being able to use certain language and jargon depending on which crews you're talking about, whether you're talking to people way up there in production or in the artistry world, or if you're talking to your fellow riggers. There's certainly different methods of communication, different styles, and you're absolutely right with the safety that's involved in rigging. That is a whole other aspect of leadership that we have to instill within us. And, again, I just love this approach that you have, that as far as leadership is concerned, it's not about a hierarchy. It's about the responsibility, and it's about having confidence to speak up when something's wrong.
Totally. Like leadership is so okay, Siobhan, I'll tip my cards. You like Jocko, right? Let's jump right to Jocko. Yeah. That stuff, that extreme ownership, that is the fast track to success. But to sorry, I get a little derailed in my little goldfishy. It's hard, but it is all those things. Leadership is not just downhill. You don't just lead what you might term your flock, right? That's the kind of an odd term. Leadership's uphill. I do most of my best work is educating my clients. That's the hardest I work, and that's the best value for my company's time. The more the people that hire us understand, the more they can identify good from bad in broad strokes on their own. And then hopefully that showcases our efforts, right? Once you can tell good from bad.
Yep, absolutely. So can you talk about some certificates or certifications or even formal education that may be beneficial to someone who's wanting to either break into rigging or who wants to become a project manager or a production rigger?
All of them. Right. You said that's like a wife question. Now, my wife's always asking me, like, how do they let you do these things? Right. I remember when I met you, you were climbing rocks in your car, and now like they just let you in and believe you. I think as you do this longer, you see the benefit. You understand the difference in competent and qualified, and you start seeing a path if you want to make yourself qualified to that. I think the obvious answers here are like the ETCP system in their certification. That seems to be the hallmark standard that we have going for us, right, wrong, or indifferent. You could add some IRATA training, or I should say rope access or work at height training. That comes in a number of forms. My path was through IRATA. There's also SPRAT. There's also, I think, specific classes and workflows to rescue for your use case in your arena with these parts. All of that's good. I look, there are, qualified fault protection that's most typically given to structural engineers and stuff. I'm trying to weasel in on some of those just to keep it going. I think I understand those concepts, but at the level I play at, that's fun to have on your name tag and stuff. It's difficult as I bring my staff in. We come from all different directions and stuff, and my crew, like, you got to be a lifelong learner. You got to be looking for. It's hard. Where do I send those peeps to learn how to wrap truss? I have a gal that works for me that was a lighting stagehand when she was grinding. Now she's like our most bad mama production manager. And she has, I think we all have an insecurity in us. I'm not flagging her. She's just the example of, like, I never built bridles on the concrete. And I'm like, oh, that's, I don't even worry about it. But she really wants to learn that. And I'm like, well, we're going to have to hook you up with like a local labor company and have you take some ground rigging calls and just be someone. Whereas I think Reed Rigging, Stage Rigging, Sapsis, I think they all have more localized certifications and classes. I don't know, like, not denigrating any of those. They're wonderful. They're all people that have been contributing to the knowledge base for 20 or more years. I don't know what card or certification you get at the end of those classes. And I don't know if there's a national clearinghouse of certification or where that weighs for you or what credibility. But they're great. Knowledge is power. They're great. Take them all, right?
And there's also certificates, right? Because not everything you will receive a formal certification like the ETCP certification. Some things are just a certificate. Like if you are doing trauma at height and you want to learn how to apply an X collar on someone, you can take an online
First
course.
Aid, sorry, I all of that.
And you get a certificate from X collar.
Certifications are nice for something. If you're sending a proposal, a risk management proposal, and you want everybody's there, that core fundamental knowledge inside you is the gain. The ETCP certification is great. I have my lapel pin. I rock that. Alpine's an ETC certified contractor. I value that in our industry and such. But really, that identifies wishful apprentices or aspirant apprentices, right? It's that journey and that fun. The ETCP, and I'm sorry, I don't want to bandwagon here, and you're asking me about certification. That should be like a 101 class, not like postgraduate work, right? They kind of market it a little differently, but that should be the basic core fundamental book work that we all know, so we have a common language of exchange.
Would postgraduate work be more like the research on orthostatic intolerance?
Well, yours at your level, I mean, when I met, you blew me away. I didn't even know about orthostatic trauma, right? It was suspension trauma is how I learned that. I can't remember what venue where we were in Shabbat. I think we've had the talk twice
Convention Center
about orthostatic stasis. We did once at like that Blizzard Arena too, where you really upgraded my firmware on these concepts, and I appreciated that. And that's how you and I know each other, because you were so postgraduate on that level. Right? I think at that time you might have been involved in VER, and I thought you would just be their training manager. I thought that's where that journey would spin out into.
It could have been had they not done the merger, and then as a contractor, they just never called me back. But I got a question count that came in a while ago. I would love to address it. Zach Mack, that's awesome, asks, how much of entertainment rigging involves dynamic human loads during the performance? Have you seen in your career any increase or decrease interest in dynamic human loads during performance? Thanks from an arborist in Omaha.
What's up, Zach? Thanks for watching, dude. In my career, sorry, I'm like a lawyer. I want to read this and make sure I answer the right thing and don't get spun off. Have you seen in your career any increase or decreased interest in dynamic human loads during... Have to say an increase, because everything we just want more, right? Being all my years of grinding and coming up, we're in Las Vegas, working locally. Huge huge circus, huge carny, huge acrobat population. So I would see silk gags all the time, super common. That's like a long silk scarf, think 10 meters, 30 feet or something like that, tied that we perform on. If you're not familiar with the circ. Always a big drop. Boom! Always. You're always in the ballroom and the points and all of that. That's what popped to my mind when I hear about dynamic human loads. Then we scale out. One of my bros and another associate fly Pink, the performer Pink, around day to day when she's touring, right? That's the most advanced, real-time and day-to-day flying gag I see, right? Gabe Woods, the head rigger for that, he goes in and puts those shivs in every day for her to create just a huge flying envelope, if you've ever seen Pink. Then the programmer behind that is this kid called Paul Sapsis, and every day he is defining her flight path and envelope. It's advanced. I've seen these 4 monster tape winches. It felt pretty cutting edge to me. With the timelines and the variety of facilities, they're not putting in CAW that stands there for 15 years. They're in a shed. They're in a festival. They're in an arena. The house audio is in the way. That's techie and high end. An increase in dynamic human loads. It all kind of has a moment in time, right? Everything's the hot ticket. The nano winches were the hot thing for a second. Flying people. I mean, 10 years ago, the CEO wanted to fly in, right? They all kind of have a fad and a cycle. It's like fashion, in a sense. So sorry, Zach, that I can't give you a hardcore answer. It cycles, right? Like flying, the dynamic load, everything increases with time. The only thing I see decreasing is the weight of LED tiles.
Yeah, there you go. So while we're kind of on this topic of dynamic loads and human performers, can we talk about safety in entertainment rigging? You take complex problems and turn them into simple solutions. Walk us through that process, because I can only imagine that when someone presents you with a want or a need, and then you've got to figure out how to make it all work, I can only imagine how much safety is considered throughout that process. So can you go ahead and take us through that process?
The hardest part in my world is convincing the stakeholders and the clients that safety's a thing. Entertainment products are still have such a legacy flavor of false positives and false successes, right? That certain clients, certain people go their whole life and they just see, Zach, I'm not dissing on the arborist, but just throw a rope over a tree branch, tie their buddy on that, 3 guys pull the rope, and the performer goes upright. Nobody knows that that's almost like dereliction of duty. So the first battle is to cross the bridge that safety has a value, a place, and is oftentimes obligatory, non-negotiable. You got to have some tiptoe language in there with people that don't see it. But once you cross the bridge, again, we're having a discussion right now that's very USA centric. If we went to the UK or Australia or certain spots, this is all way more buttoned up and 1, 2, 3, bang, 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 very strong template. Safety doesn't sleep, diligence doesn't sleep, right? I don't know how to turn that on and off. It's just baked into the algorithm in my mind. When you go through, I'm not an expert, right? I'm a student of all this. Safety's pretty far-fetched. Is that an exclusion zone? We seem to be arena-centric in this call. Is that an exclusion zone to keep civilians off the arena floor, off the concrete while you're pulling chains? That would be a level of safety that's very low. Is that not keeping the ground? So Sands Expo Center in Las Vegas, I spent a lot of time there, have a lot of friends that have earned a living there, have been head riggers there. It's pretty common in there. It's a ballroom, there are some of their spaces like 25 feet tall for people to build the truss under the scissor lifts and stuff. There's an element of safety that at a very low level seems to be culturally accepted, right? But should be eradicated outright. Overhead work, again, zoom out of entertainment into the lifting industry. When stuff's moving over your head, don't be there. We're numb and callow to that. I'm the weirdo if I say, hey, truss is moving back up. I'm the weirdo, not you're ignorant for being in a workspace like that. Safety starts there on that level. I don't know if I'm asking your question. If you wanted to talk about like health and safety and risk protocols and trigger charts and all of that stuff, that gets more on the high end. We're starting more in the grassroots thing, ground riggers, right? Like on a job site. Ground rigging is like playing right field in t-ball or baseball. Right field's the person, I use that as an example, that's the person that the ball gets hit to least, right? When you're watching that lift, your response, the way I learned it anyway, is if the bucket rigger hits something, that's on you, not them. As the driver of the bucket lift, I learned the opposite. It's on you, not them. But as the ground rigger, that's how you try to teach them. You're lifeguarding this person from running into stuff, from stuff running into them, from working in an inappropriate way, from not seeing something behind them, from a change in the environment. That's like an impossible skill to remain razor sharp for, right? Person comes down, the bucket goes up to their work site, and they're probably static for 15 to an hour. What's the person on the ground? Are they like doing shark laps constantly, moving cones? Cones aren't really a thing in the US. All that sort of stuff. Or are they on their phone? The first second the bucket's overhead. That would be a managed element of safety. I'd like to. Am I answering your question, or am I just throwing out like grassroots safety issues? I want to do both. I don't want to rant or anything.
We are absolutely covering a lot of like what goes on in the weeds. So from a ground rigger's perspective, what I'm gathering is, keep people clear from what's going on above them, because as much as upriggers try not to drop objects, they're not perfect. We're all human. A lot of people have dropped an object in their life, although it would be great if tool tethering and tethering in general was more prevalent in our industry. I'd like to see that trend up. I'd love to see that trending upward. And to your point, as a ground rigger who maybe just, on their phone, no, that's not something that we need to see. We need to see you being vigilant. You got to have head on a swivel. You got to be watching everything going on around you. So that's definitely like in the
hard things to do, though. That's the ideal, but those are hard things to do, right? This is all pretty grassroots. This is just I don't know what the audience is. Then we can click up a notch to now we're governing the whole.
I was actually just gonna ask. So if we zoom out, what are some pre-production safety considerations when you are working with the drafts, or when you're working with your clients and you're trying to problem solve before we get to the install?
First thing that pops into my head is just design factor and safety factor, right? When you're wheeling through there, I interface with so many different rental houses, purchase houses, people that all have different types of truss, right? On your average, just that being able to understand your pack, right? Mm-hmm. How many different types of truss modules or pieces am I going to get? I need to design to the governing condition of the weakest one. That's the first thing, right? Making sure your half ton's not too heavy. Safety in the drafting phase.
Or the pre-production phase.
Yeah. You're just like Siobhan to me. That's like starts at the dock. Like I've done risk analysis for convention center work. Right. Alpine's from Vegas. We have definitely a presence in the trade show side of things. It's getting hit by a forklift is the most likely danger I have when I do our personal assessments for that. Right. What's the control measure for getting hit by a forklift? High vis. Right, so we're always the folks. This might be baked in just to our ethos and how we roll. Helmets and high vis, right? We missed helmets. Now helmets are more common. Helmets were not commonplace when I started and broke in, and that was crazy to me. I don't need a law telling me that when there's someone working over my head that they're not 100%. Add to that, entertainment rigging is a young industry. Wendy, I think entertainment rigging's 30 years old, right? 1980. 1976, 33 years old. We're that close to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I cannot think of another modern trade that is only 35 years old. Plumbing's millennia old. Construction, entertainment rigging's 35 years old, and there's no ignoring in the false positives that I mentioned that there's still some stench of the guy with the briefcase handcuffed to his wrist with $500,000 in it and no dough, no show, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We're still close enough to that, but we didn't wear helmets 15 years ago because that wasn't cool. Or I rigged when that. I tell you what, that was a pretty golden era of rigging.
I mean, we didn't wear hard hats even 2 to 5 years ago because it wasn't cool.
Totally, or high vis. Then we started wearing helmets, but we didn't wear high vis. To get the front of that. Understand why from a regulatory level and from I want to go home to my wife level or my husband or my partner or my kids. We're at work here.
Or on the lake to go fishing. It's, that kind of plays into positive safety cultures, thinking of it less as an us versus them being OSHA or our employer. We're thinking more of it on the level of, oh, you know what? I care about myself. I care about the people around me. I want to go home in one piece. My job isn't worth me spraining an ankle. My job isn't worth me falling to my death.
Injury of any type. It's
of
work,
any type.
Right?
Yep.
You're functioning at the will and burden of an employer. You're not there. You wouldn't. I mean, some of us do take risks. My risk profile before I got into all this was crazy. It was crazy. I could warp your mind with the stuff I was into recreational.
I bet, especially with the hiking and rock climbing. We had a couple more questions come in. Ryan asks, how do you manage clients and event production heads in conversation? What tactics and lines do you have over the years to not sacrifice safety? Ooh, I'm curious if you have any one-liners.
How do you manage clients and event production heads in conversation? Honestly, with authenticity. We all have a different approach, right? You have to find the verbiage and the tactics that fit you, right? As I try to train and influence my staff and stuff, they hear me say wild stuff, and you have to find your own voice and your own style. You can emulate positive mentors and people that you think are great, right? Once I got to start reading emails, you see, how do you manage clients? What tactic and lines? Man, I don't have any catchy safety lines, I guess, like diligence never sleeps and stuff. Hopefully it's consistency in your approach, right? I say if people give me 3 tries, I'm in there forever. The first one I seem radical, especially in pre-pro, so many questions, so many things. A lot of people are just used to dealing with these false positives. Okay, man. Here, sorry, go ahead, Siobhan. I got a one-liner. Go for it.
I like to store as much information in my head as possible so that when someone does, and it often happens, want to challenge me, I just pull it right out of the bag. This is because of that, and you can't really mess with logic to a certain point, right? Because when we're dealing with rigging, we're dealing with forces, we're dealing with very basic physics, and very basic structural analysis.
You ever have a conversation with a designer? Logic doesn't hold.
Oh boy.
No. Sorry to interrupt. I hear.
That's true. Totally. That's just one tactic that I have is having an abundance of information so that no matter what someone chooses to challenge you on, you've got an answer for them. And if you don't, be resourceful. That would be my tactic number 2. What was your one-liner that you just remembered?
Oh, shoot. I got thinking about when I broke into, and I did the exact same thing, Siobhan. Data, science, knowledge, technical acumen. These are things you can build within yourself before you have the one-liners and the tactics and the trick. You can peddle science. I remember the first time I went through E3, large gaming exposition managed by GES, and at the time it was Kelly Green was the head rigger. Would be too soft a term for what Kelly was. He managed all like rigging services for GES in Southern California for like a long time. Opinions varied on him. When I went in there, they everybody's going to test you. I remember in that era talking to my older friends, and they were like, "Who the heck are you, dude? Why wouldn't you get fronted on? What have you proven?" This is when I was just starting to get my first production gigs. One notch past. You have to prove yourself and demonstrate competency. In that instance, I mean, I had a really cool load analysis pretty document that I handed like Kelly like 85 pages of my homework, and here's a one line. This is my authenticity. I said, here you go. Here's all my diligence, Kelly. Let me know when you fall asleep. Right? You're not going to read all 80 pages of this. They're gonna look at that, see you've got your act together, and move on. There's one thing. Let me my one-liner. What is? Oh, I did have a one-liner and I brain farted. I apologize. I got too much in my head. Never sacrifice safety. Never. What line? You have to. So to not sacrifice safety, you have to be willing to walk away. All stop.
Oh, that's a great one.
If you're not willing, it takes so long. People I admired and looked to, I'm still coming up, so I can't say on the come up, but on the come up said, Brent, you have to work to be the immovable rock in the stream. The water and the force of data is constantly pushing on you. All these competing incentives and voices in a production team are the river. You have to be the rock that the river moves around, not the rock that the river moves. Sort of my one-liner. Here's my one-liner, and this might be a little judgy, and I apologize if you make a good living do this. You're winning. Disregard my opinion. But there's hangers and there's riggers. A hanger gets a plot, shows up on site, it melts down, and you get a lot of OT, rehanging stuff. But whatever, that's the drawing I got. I know there are production hangers. I don't hear people talking about hangers, but that's what you are. You're not a rigger, you're a hanger. I tell everybody I touch that'll listen, don't be a hanger, being a rigger. You have to apply critical thought to all of those situations. Apply your safety matrix, apply all the best practice. Just apply what you know makes sense. Oh, we're not going to dead hang both hang sides. We'll put a motor on one side, pull it up 80 feet, and then all of these things. But safety has to be non-negotiable, right? You have to very clearly in your mind understand where the backstop is.
Absolutely.
And you have to be willing to walk away. That's the only way you're the immovable rock in the river.
You have to be willing to walk away. And that
if it's a bad situation, why would you want to be there? I tell here's some more one-liners. Hungry, not thirsty. You have to be hungry in this world to get what you want. If that changes into thirsty's kind of a new school term, right? Where you're needy or wanty, or you're just, which is really hard because it oozes from you, your enthusiasm when you're on the come up, but you have to be hungry, not thirsty.
So Ryan says, I like that. Give 3 tries. First time radical, second time the opposite end of the spectrum, third time more dialed in. We got another question, a couple of questions.
So it was that was in my, if I get 3 tries. That's because the first time I do a gig with strangers, my approach looks radical and I'm a little hard-edged sometimes. I'm definitely nicer in person than I am in email or stuff like that. But by the third time we parlay together, you see our system. You see what we're about and what we're trying to accomplish and the why, or what the outcomes of the questions we ask on the front end are, right? If you give it 3 sorry, please.
This is a great segue into one of our other questions, which thank you guys for all these great questions. Zach asked, do you have any tips for encouraging all team members to take responsibility for their own and each other's safety?
You're on a team first, right? If you're truly on a team, you're not a group of strangers. You're working towards a common goal, and you should care about each other, not just because you're getting paid, right? Rigging and gigging in entertainment creates a magic kinship. I'm not comparing it to warfare because warfare is a whole other crazy thing. But you're under duress. You're working in stressful situations, right? Love's a strong word, but kinship with each other grows, right? If you're on a really tight rig squad, 5 of us, hopefully you like each other, right? There's gigs where you tours, all that stuff where you don't get along. But if you're truly a team and you're working on that level, teams care for each other, different than a family. A team is a performance-based thing. I think core tenets of technical work, arborist or anything, rock climbing is where this first got baked into me, is safety checks, right? You put your harness on. I thought you were always supposed to have your buddy give a look at it, right? It should be baked into every step to take responsibility for yourself, make sure your harness is in good working order. But it's buddy system. Have a swim buddy, right? How do you have it would be mandatory if I saw a negligent or uncaring act. It's kind of goofy to talk about care and empathy, but that's how I roll, man. If you're in the crew, if we're on a team together, rowing. And the success of each of us is the success of any of us. I think it's a Jocko thing. It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate.
Absolutely.
Right? Like I encouraging all to take if you're not taking responsibility in a work at height industry, if you're don't have self-awareness to take your own self-care, you're not built for it, because there's an inherent risk to leaving the ground.
I think we touched on some really important aspects of this too. We kind of touched on being willing to walk away, which, there's a certain amount of self-respect that needs to be involved there. Consistency, leading by example. And like what you just said, it's not about what you preach, it's what you tolerate. So if you say one thing and then you see someone doing something less than ideal, but you tolerate that, well, then they're just going to keep pushing that boundary and pushing that boundary and pushing that boundary, right? So
it's the example you set too as the leader, right? Mm-hmm. I'm at a point in my career now where the harness doesn't go on so much, so people don't see like my self-audit or how I'm constantly buddy checking and stuff. But it's definitely your example and your attitude and your tone if you're in a leadership position, right? Like by the time you make it to a leadership position, someone's put you there because of your opinions. Don't forget that, even if you're young. You're there for a reason. Identify that reason. All the reasons aren't benevolent and good, but you're in that spot for a reason. And as the stakeholder in that safety or ownership position, they want to know what you think. They're counting on you to develop those things. I have such a specific, like in the last year and a half example of this that I want to throw out, but I'm not involved. Coachella.
Do you want to talk about that?
I don't know any of these people, right? These are people that touch my rigging family, and I don't want to get into it. But that's my example of top-down leadership, and that's all I want to say. Right? If you want everybody to clip in and be about it and be double checking, triple checking, there's a way you conduct yourself. And I don't know any of these people. And let's take a left turn. But that was just the example that I thought of as we're talking about this.
Yeah. Ryan gives us some really great comments. The rescue world has 2 training tactics. They try to live by 1, train until you can't get it wrong, and 2, everyone goes home. Those are great tactics, a great mindset to have when you're working at height. And we had, Luis says, hey, big hug, Brent.
Luis, what up, man? I hope you're living right out there. I can't wait to see you again.
I love that. I love that so much. So here's another great question. This goes more into training. How do we offer better resources for lead and head riggers to develop better teams that come up with the proper team mindset training and apprenticeship attitude to always learn and grow? That's a weighted question.
That's a cool one. Let's roll the last one we have. Just one thing I want to say about that. I think in times of duress or crisis, you do not rise to the moment. You slink back to your training.
Yes, Absolutely.
No one rises to the moment. Reptile brain, man. Like 1, 2, 3. These steps. Call 911. Where's the rescue box? Who's up top? What do we got? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's not. You're not going to find your best self. I've lived horrible moments, and it's your bedrock that carries you through that stuff. Cool. This one. How do we offer better resources for lead head riggers to develop better teams? We start talking about it. We ask each other questions like this for people that are already doing it. It's a hard thing. Leadership's hard. Driving, I say the world of men, Siobhan, no offense. It's a mixed group these days, but like driving the world of men is hard. Construction in general, day one of a load-in is hardcore. How do we offer better resources? You talk about it. You offer what has helped you. You start talking to your people. So if you're just a lead head rigger, how many of your team are just the call, right? You're not always a team. It takes time to become a team, right? Sometimes it's just a call. I work for the union, open call. How many of those people are thinking about the term mindset, are thinking about the term training, or are approaching the profession or the endeavor with an apprenticeship attitude? If they're thinking about those words or thinking about finding a mentor apprentice thing, we're open to this talk and we can have this talk. It can't be a dark conversation. You can't be seen as weak for talking about these things. These things are strength, right? I don't know. It's a slow thing. Nobody talked to me about leadership theory or anything. It's just something I noticed, right? Head riggers were magic. They come through, they're like a superhero or something when you're a kid. How do we offer better reason? We keep talking about it, and collectively we grow this thing. What I am is a dying breed. It's the nature of the industry. This is my personal opinion. I share this with other heavy cats, or people I chat with. I think we're breeding out. The nature of the consolidation and the favoring big companies and the in-house providers and the critical thought, proper head riggers and production riggers are breeding out, right? When I broke in, if you're a rock and roll guy showing up into the venue, 85% chance you had to call the bridles. These days, it's an 85% chance the house guys got it. Man, it's really to get to the spot where you're thinking about leadership theory, you're really good. That says you've kind of pushed past technical competencies and the chores of rigging, and now you're thinking about like operational efficiency for your environment, right?
I really like something that you mentioned, that any of these topics, from leadership to communication to safety, all of these things, leading by example, preaching, not tolerating, all these things. You mentioned something about traditionally being seen as weak for bringing up certain topics. And I like to say, I am not weak. I am strong enough to bring this up because I know I might be ridiculed, but I'm going to push through it anyway. And that's a sign of strength, not weakness. So keep pushing for excellency when you're going about learning new things and practicing. We have another great question that came in. I hope we can answer it. I'm currently a freelance theater lighting designer and lighting technician. Ian, I'm so sorry. Mr. Young asks, hello from Glasgow, Scotland. I've recently joined Plaza and I'm looking to join the National Rigging Training Scheme. I've been doing ground truss work and trying to get my head around rigging math. Are there any tips for me when I get on the training scheme towards becoming a level 2 rigger for theater and entertainment? So, I think this is more, if I'm understanding, this is a question about understanding rigging math, any like tips and tricks. So would you like to speak on that?
I know Plaza has, I believe it's like a 3-tiered system over there in the UK, right? Which I'm a fan of. I think they have some practical components in their training scheme, not just a on paper test. So I'm sorry, Ian, I can't specifically talk to what's going to help you at level 1, level 2, or level 3 because I'm not familiar. I just know there's different levels. Gosh, don't be intimidated is the first thing. I do think having sorry, I got to sneeze. I liked algebra. I liked math in algebra 2 so much in high school that I took it twice. That's my joke. That means I failed. had to take it a second time so I'd pay more attention to get there. Only to say my background in math, I wasn't in high school or secondary school or ever taken AP Calc 3 or anything like that. I dropped out of trig my senior year just because math wasn't into it. Now I force but I do have a basic competency of like pre-algebra and algebra 1. Very much. I see a lot of that. In my day-to-day workflow, I use trigs like on a survey. If I need to, sorry, this is applications of math. How to use math. I don't know what books are available over in the UK. I had the Harry Donovan book. That was my intro. Then I've read everyone since, Glarham's and on and on and on. Try to get your head around rigging math. Think about a triangle. You got to get down with triangles.
Jump in. Down to triangles. So I'll actually jump in and suggest go to Khan Academy. Go to khanacademy.com. It's free, and they take you through different math courses. So if you want to go through Algebra 2, you go through the videos and you go through the quizzes. They've got it on geometry and trigonometry and on up. But I think that's actually a great resource that we may not talk about enough in this when we're like talking specifically about entertainment rigging. Just because Khan Academy is directed to high school students, it doesn't mean that we can't use that resource. So I actually do want to throw that out there. Try it out and let us know if those videos help you out with your understanding of math. Because math is math, physics is physics. When you get the basics, then you're able to apply it to a word problem or real life problem, right? So when you learn the core concepts, then you're able to take that and practice it in the world of entertainment rigging. So that's just one resource I'd love to throw out there.
Ian, get in touch with material breaking strength, right? What happens when you choke around sling? What happens when you basket around sling? The breaking strength, the safe working loads, the ultimate breaking strength, these sort of things. Because what happens, you take that number in isolation, and then you start using them as a system. You start taking this shackle and this round sling on this, and then even the way, as a ground rigger, even the way you wrap the truss creates a bridle on the bottom, right? Like a lot of work in ballrooms, you got that big cable bridge that has to go above everything else. So what do? Now you're wrapping super tight and super flat. Got to get the trim. Should be using like a lifting bar, right? But you don't. That's not what's up. That's not what parts rolled in. So you've got this, the super flat wrap. What's going on there? There's rigging math right there if you're a ground rigger. I know you got to get trim. I know everybody's just thinking about this. I've now been doing this long enough. You'll see localized bending if you get crazy with that, right? Localized bending is when a small piece starts to bend in between the nodes. You're always supposed to wrap at the nodes. No one always wraps at the manufacturer says to wrap at the nodes. You should wrap at the nodes. That's what I see day to day when I travel around. That's not always the case, right? A next thing you can run into is localized bending in there. Think about that. Sorry, Ian. I'm just trying to say the math is all around you. I don't know specifically what you're trying to ingest right now. Equilibrium calibrations for chain hoists, bridle forces, load dissipation, all that sort of stuff. Those are all kind of different clubs in the math thing. Man, I was playing last night. I was playing an 8th grade algebra game, sitting next to my wife, a math game, just to do that stuff quicker, right? Like Algebra 1, just try to get, if you were shy of Algebra 1, I would focus on triangles. There's more triangles in the rigging game than people let on. Master the triangle. How to do that, I think the Khan Academy would be a really good one. There's lots of freeware out there. I took a structural engineering, a shareware course from MIT, Siobhan, because I thought,
nice.
Whatever.
Oh, that's great resource.
Lesson 1 was lesson 1. This was day 1, was like as far as I ever wanted to get in this, was compression and tension and all the diags, all the individual members, figuring out the forces in every member of a box truss. Oh, cool, this is all me. I'm going to be an MIT structural engineer. Lesson 2, so I bumbled through that. Lesson 2 was Greek. I quit. I was like, I'm done. I got day 1. It can be tough, Ian, right? Depending on our come up and our math background, triangles. Breaking strength. Start with breaking strength and learn how you're putting these pieces together, and how that absolute breaking strength is impacted by how you use it, how you bend it, twist it, right? You ever see folks twist a span set like a turnbuckle to micro adjust? That's appropriate, that's not appropriate. You see your buddy in wherever hang a really flat bridle, everybody's gonna blow up and start going crazy. Maybe there's 50 pounds on it, and you have a defensible position to explain that tactic. But you got to know, because if you're just at a spot where you can't back it up when all your boys or girls are fronting on you, then you probably shouldn't be hanging a flat bridle. You should just stick with, the default ones.
Hopefully we answered that question.
Ian, it's all around you, man. The math is all around you, dude. Like, don't let it bog you down. You're not a head rigger in one day. And by the time you're doing that, everybody always, when I was coming up, they said, turn back. You don't want this life. I was like, what do you mean you don't want this life? You guys are mega. You're like, blah, blah, blah. And no one ever tells you about what comes with it, the other parts of it.
Right.
To speak to our question about mindset or leadership, this might be a new school thing. Maybe this is how I can help our collective. Start talking about it, man. Share your strengths, share your weaknesses if you're there. Ian, take it one step at a time, man. Learn breaking strengths and start noticing triangles.
So I would love to. Are you getting a little feedback on your end?
Negative.
I'll try to talk quietly because I can hear myself in my speakers. So I
sound better if I mute. I can try that.
Oh, it's all good. We've got to wrap this up here. So do you have any last minute words of advice or industry insights that you would like to share with our audience?
Show up on time. Ask what's next. If you want to come up in the game, those are like Ian more than the math. Show up on time. Ask what's next. Asking what's next seems to be a dying art. At every level, from your first day as a box pusher to every day of my life, I ask my boss, what's next? Hey, we got there. What's next? That seems to be dipping off, right? Your lack of experience or your lack of anything can be overcome with a good attitude and asking what's next. Stay busy. Keep your head on a swivel. Shoot first, move fast. Or I don't know, what is it? Stay low, shoot fast, or whatever.
I think that's all really solid advice. And I muted you just so that I wouldn't get the feedback. Facebook user says, hi, Brent. Hello, Facebook user. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Industry Explorers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And I will see you guys on our next adventure. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having me, Siobhan.
Happy Easter.
Yeah, likewise.